Good afternoon. This is Courtney Neubauer with the Division of Nutrition Support. And today we are going to talk about the Supply Chain Assistance Funds. This is a new funding stream coming from USDA, and the funds will be provided directly to the school systems. So we want to make sure that you are aware what's coming, kind of what to look forward to for some of the memos that we'll be posting in the next few days, and then also how to go about spending those funds. So we'll start with a little bit of some background information and just general information about this funding stream. Also, allowable and unallowable products that can be purchased with this money, allocations, and also the required attestation information, the required oversight, reporting, and record keeping, financial management. We'll also discuss reallocation of funds if that is something that does need to happen, and then just other helpful information about these funds. So to start, USDA, Food Nutrition Services, has allocated $1 billion in relief funding to state agencies. This is made available through the Commodity Credit Corporation and is authorized under the CCC Charter Act. These resources are referred to as Supply Chain Assistance Funds, or in short, SCA. These funds are targeted to provide a rapid and direct response via supplied commodities to affected school districts. So on December 17th, USDA announced this new cash stream that's coming to school systems, and that is, it's meant to be used to purchase food products. These funds will deliver direct relief from ongoing supply chain issues and improve the quality and consistency of school meals for children in communities that are experiencing disruptions. We in Louisiana have received $16,965,978 in supply chain assistance funds, and this will be distributed to our National School Lunch participating schools. This includes the public schools, tribal schools, charter schools, nonprofit private schools, as well as the residential child care institutions, as long as those school systems participate in the National School Lunch Program. We did post memo SFS 22-57, which was a summary memo of these funds. It also had direct links to the 2 USDA memos that were posted. Those memos had the questions and answers, which is also posted as SFS 22-54, and then a summary of the allocations from USDA, which was SFS 22-53. These funds are a critical funding stream that will provide additional funding resources to schools so they can purchase domestic food products as part of school districts' efforts to respond to the widespread supply chain disruptions. We are hoping that we will be able to distribute these funds very soon, but to determine the allocation of the funds, we were to distribute these funds on a formula that's calculated, calculated payment to all eligible SFAs. So the first question is whether all SFAs are eligible. And so no, so all SFAs that currently operate the National School Lunch Program and or the School Breakfast Program may be eligible to receive funds. However, if an SFA does not operate these child nutrition programs, they're not eligible for the assistance. The funds are not distinguished by school type. So all residential child care institutions, charter schools, parochial schools, private schools, and public schools are eligible as long as those schools participate in the National School Lunch, School Breakfast Program. Many of our school systems are operating the Seamless Summer option and the National School Lunch After School Snack Program, and that is usually in place of the National School Lunch School Breakfast Program. So these funds are available for school systems that are operating the NSLP or the School Breakfast Program and may only be used to purchase unprocessed or minimally processed domestic food products. And the Seamless Summer option and the National School Lunch After School Snacks components are part of the National School Lunch Program, so participation in these programs would still be allowable for you to spend those funds. If a school system is operating other child nutrition programs, whether that be the fresh fruit and vegetable program, the summer food service program, and/or the child and adult care food program, these supply chain assistance funds may not be used in conjunction with supporting those programs. The funds need to support the use of domestic food products for only the National School Lunch, School Breakfast meal services. So let's talk about the allowable and unallowable products. So this funding stream has very specific rules about what this money can be spent to purchase. So examples of allowable purchases: it must be used exclusively for the purchase of domestic food products that are unprocessed or minimally processed. Examples of some of these food products would include fluid milk, other dairy products such as cheese and yogurt, fruits and vegetables, and this also includes 100% fruit juices. You can purchase grain products such as pastas and rice, meat, whether that be whole pieces or food items such as ground meat, and meat alternatives like beans or legumes. Foods in a wide variety of minimal processing states are allowed. So you can purchase whole, cut, pureed. You can also purchase fresh, frozen, canned, dried, etc. So the main requirement is that these are domestic food products and they are unprocessed or minimally processed products. So there are, of course, Buy American requirements, which we've already kind of mentioned, being that they have to be domestic products. So the steps that an SFA must take to ensure the domesticity of food products purchased with SCA funds is consistent with the measures that are taken for all other purchases. So that's the normal Buy American requirements. The difference here is that there are limited exceptions that you can use under the National School Lunch Buy American provision, and those exceptions cannot be used to purchase products under this funding source. So all products purchased must be domestic. There are no exceptions to that. In addition, with all other federal funds, SFAs are required to follow the federal procurement regulations, which also includes the option to utilize emergency non-competitive procurements. So some products that are not permitted, so foods that are generally understood to be significantly processed or prepared may not be purchased. So for example, you could purchase crushed tomatoes, shredded cheese, whole wheat flour, and sliced vegetables, which are all items that are allowable individually, but a pre-made pizza, which comprises those same ingredients, would not be an allowable purchase. Other examples of unallowable products include baked goods such as breads, muffins, or crackers, prepackaged sandwiches or meals, or other prepared or pre-cooked items such as chicken nuggets that come ready to eat or that require no further preparation beyond heating. Also, non-domestic food products cannot be purchased with these funds. So one of the questions that has come up is, can SFAs use any portion of these funds to support labor, supplies, or administrative expenses? And the answer is no. Supply chain assistance funds may only be used for purchases of unprocessed or minimally processed domestic food products for use in school meals programs. Are non-food costs that are essential to the procurement of unprocessed or minimally processed domestic food products allowable? And the answer is yes. Incidental costs such as those related to shipping and handling or packaging, which are part of the normal purchase price, are allowable for the use of these funds. So when we talk about Buy American, often the question comes, is there a local requirement? So do we have to actually purchase local products? And the answer is no. So you're not required to purchase locally grown or raised or caught foods. You are encouraged to procure local foods whenever feasible, and that these funds may make purchasing from local producers an excellent option for addressing unexpected supply chain disruptions. So the allocation and attestation information. So how did we come up with the allotments and also the required attestation requirements? So to start, all SFAs are not required to accept the funds. So you can elect to receive, so we made allocations to all school systems, but if you choose not to accept those funds, you have the right to do so. So you can decline or not accept that allocation, and then that money will then become available for reallocation down the road. If an SFA wishes to decline funds, we do have a form that they would need to complete and submit back to us. We recently got this question, and this is something that is not included in the questions and answers from USDA, but they did answer verbally on the use of these products. So an SFA that has an FSMC can utilize these funds, and they are entitled to receiving those, but they have to follow the same guidelines as the self-prep operations. So if those monies are going to be used, they would have to follow the same requirements for the domestic products, and they would need to support the operation of the food service just as if it was a self-prep operation. So USDA has made it clear that before a state agency can distribute funds to an SFA, the SFA must complete an attestation statement. So the attestation statement is intended to ensure that the SFA is experiencing supply chain disruptions and financial difficulties related to the supply chain disruptions, that you'll use the funds only for the purchase of unprocessed or minimally processed domestic food products, and that you will continue to observe all existing program requirements regarding record keeping and accountability in connection with the use of these funds. So before any allocation will be distributed to an SFA, the attestation form will need to be received. So we will distribute an attestation form to all of our SFAs, and the attestation form will include all of the areas discussed on the previous slide, that you are experiencing supply chain disruptions and related financial difficulties, that you'll only use the funds to purchase domestic, unprocessed, or minimally processed foods, that you'll not use the funds for any labor, indirect, or other administrative expenses, that you'll comply with all record keeping and review requirements per 7 CFR 210.9 B17 and 7 CFR 210.18, which would include maintaining documentation, demonstrating appropriate use of funds, and then also that you'll comply with all federal procurement and financial management requirements. So this is what our attestation form will look like. So the plan at this point is that we will put out a memo which contains the general information about supply chain funds. It will also include a list of all the allocations for each school system, and it will include both the attestation form and also the form declining the funds. So we'll post that as soon as the final allocations have been verified. We do hope that that will be by the end of this week. If for some reason that's not the case, then of course we would extend the deadline for the attestation. But our hope is that we could get these attestation forms back pretty quickly, hopefully by February the 4th, which is the end of next week, and that we would be able to start distributing funds in early to mid-February. So the form is pretty simple. It just has you complete your, enter your name as the SFA director or the head of the organization. So it would need to be completed by either the authorized rep or the superintendent. Include your title, the name of the SFA. You'll then need to mark each of these areas, and it's basically the same areas that we just mentioned on the previous slide, and then you'll sign and date. You can send this back to us by email. So you can send that to childnutritionprograms@la.gov, or you can fax it to us, And once we receive that, we'll start being able to distribute funds in the coming weeks. The form, the declination form, so if you decide that you want to decline those benefits, the form looks very similar. It has you including your name, your title, the SFA name, and then that you're aware that you are eligible to receive these funds, but that you wish to decline them, and then you would sign and date. And the monies that would be allocated to an SFA that does decline them would then go back into the pot of money and would be redistributed once the first allocations are complete. So I've already mentioned kind of what our process is. So we will post a notification memo and it will include the allocations. So the allocations are based off of a very specific formula from USDA, just as it was for the emergency cost funds and the PEBT local level funds. USDA has determined that calculation. Once that notification will include the payment amount, and then all of the requirements on the proper use of the funds, instructions on completing that attestation, and then you should either send that attestation or the declination form back to our email address. If you don't send it back timely, we're going to follow up with you one time to ensure that you that you didn't overlook this, and then the funding will begin to be distributed out. And if an SFA does not follow through with submitting either of those forms, then they will basically forfeit that money in that initial allocation, and will have to go to the second allocation for the remainder of those funds. So it is very important that you submit this back to us as quickly as you possibly can, so that we can begin those allocations. In addition to the posting of the memo, I will send a email from my email address with the same information once those allocations are made available, so that you will also be aware of that if you don't, if you overlooked the memo. So the deadline for us as a state agency to offer payments to SFAs, so we are encouraged to begin issuing funds as soon as we can, and preferably no later than March 1st. So we are less than 1 week away from the beginning of February, and we know that February is a shorter month, so March 1st will be here before we know it. So we are hoping that we can begin these distributions before March 1st and hopefully mid-February. So our requirement for state agencies to finish the final obligations are September 30th, 2023. And this is basically, we have that set pot of money, and we have allocated all of it out in first allocations. But if SFAs do decline that, it would go back into the pot for a second allocation, and we'll have a little bit more time to get all that money out, so that we're left with no money left in our pot. So our timelines are 100% based on the submission of the attestation form. So once those allocations are finalized and we can make those available to all the SFAs, we then will want you to submit that attestation form as soon as we can. So allocations are based on a predetermined formula, which was described by USDA. So the allocations were based off of two separate components. So first, there was a base payment amount of $5,000 to all school systems. So $5,000 was the set amount for all SFAs. That's where we started. And then we were left with still over $16 million in the pot once we gave all SFAs that initial $5,000. So then what we did was we determined the proportion of enrollment for each school system based on the state's total enrollment. So we looked at the total enrollment of all of our SFAs, and we took each SFA's enrollment and divided that by that total enrollment to give us a percentage, and that percentage was the percentage of the money that the remainder of the money that would be allocated to each particular SFA. So We used October, which was what was recommended by USDA. So they asked for it to be October 2021 to calculate those funds. So we used October. So we kind of scoured that data to make sure that it appeared accurate. If there were discrepancies that we noticed, maybe the enrollment and the attendance were matching, or the enrollment and the eligibles were not matching, we contacted the SFAs to have them adjust that so that we made sure that this data was accurate to reflect what should be correct for that particular school system. So that base payment of the $5,000 helped to ensure that even the smallest districts received some money. And then the proportional amount was intended to provide resources that helped scale with the size of the student population. So bigger school systems are going to get more money, whereas smaller school systems may not get as much. So as I explained already, we started with that full allocated amount. So the $16,965,978. And we then withheld $5,000 base payment to each of our SFAs. The second part, we were left with still over $16 million, just not quite as much as we had initially. And we took that remainder of the money and we allocated that based off of each SFA's share of the statewide enrollment reflective of October 2021. So oversight, record keeping and oversight, all SFAs are required to maintain purchasing and other related records for review and audit purposes. So oversight of all program funds is included in existing oversight and monitoring measures. So we'll continue to use our same ways that we monitor funds to monitor the use of these funds. So the supply chain assistance funds will be reviewed and monitored in the same way as we monitor any other funding stream within our programs within the nonprofit school food service account. The execution of these oversight measures, as well as the retention of purchasing records, will ensure accountability and appropriate use of funds, which is consistent with the USDA FNS and the CCC requirements. So SFAs are required to maintain documentation to support food purchases that are allowable for the purposes of the supply chain assistance funds. So that is that they are unprocessed or minimally processed domestic food products, and they equal the amount received, and that's in money from this funding source, and it's consistent with the regular program record keeping requirements. You should maintain regular records pertaining to the school food service requirements. So what you would normally keep for other purchases, you would keep that here. That can include invoices, receipts, other documents provided when the SFA executes purchases with these funds. There must be evidence that the supply chain assistance funds were used for allowable purchases. SFAs are not required to proactively provide that documentation to us. So we will look at that when we review you or when we come to you. You don't have to actively send that to us while you're spending down these funds. So financial management. So the question, must supply chain assistance funds be deposited into the school food service nonprofit food service account? And the answer is yes. So these funds will be deposited into your nonprofit food service account, and that is the same account where your reimbursements are already going. Once deposited, how do you have to track these funds in that account? So these funds do not need to be tracked separately from other monies within that account. They do not need to be tracked separately at all from an accounting standpoint. So you would just need to be able to, in your documentation, support that the monies received through this funding source, you also spent that same amount of money on allowable products, but you don't need to track it from an accounting standpoint. In that account, it doesn't have to be tracked separately in the account from your other monies. So can you use these funds to cover the cost of past expenditures, so things that you've already purchased? And the answer is no. So you cannot use this to cover the cost of past expenditures, and it can only be used for current or future expenses. And this can include new obligations or bills, which were on prior unpaid obligations that can come due after you receive these funds. So what that means is if you have signed a purchasing contract for milk at the beginning of the school year, you pay for this on a monthly basis. The funds are received somewhere around March 1st. If you receive invoices on or after March 1st, you can use these funds to pay for those particular invoices. So reallocation of funds. My hope is that we won't have to reallocate any funds, but in all honesty, I'm sure that we will have some funds to reallocate. So as I mentioned, we have at this point, we will be allocating the entire $16 million out in first allocation. So we intend to allocate all of that out. If school systems do decide to decline the receipt of those funds, their portion of the payment will then go back into a pot of money, basically. And once we are finished with that first allocation, we'll then start the process of second allocations on what's left. If we do get to the point where we'll have to reallocate money, we will not need a new attestation, nor will the requirements be any different. So the attestation conditions that are completed initially for that first allocation are going to be the same for any subsequent reallocations. And if we do still have funds at the beginning of school year 22-23, we as a state are encouraged to try to reallocate somewhere around that time so that you'll have money for the start of the new school year. So when we do get to where we are reallocating, if that does come to that, does the process include the same limitations on use? And the answer is yes. So if we do reallocate funds, they're subject to the exact same limitations on the usage and record keeping requirements as the initial funding stream. And so you would still have to purchase domestic, unprocessed, or minimally processed food products to support the National School Lunch, School Breakfast program. So some other helpful information. So our key dates and timelines, March 1st, 2022 is the date in which we are encouraged to begin making payments. We do hope that we will be able to begin making payments before that date, but we just want to make sure that the allocations are correct. So we're double checking that, trying to finish up some of that work, and then we'll make that the allocations as well as the attestation form available. And as long as we can receive those attestation forms quickly, we will be able to begin making payments before that March 1st date. If we do have money to reallocate, we are encouraged to do that before, but no later than September 30th, 2022. And then this grant will end September 30th, 2023. So at that point, we intend to have all of the funds fully obligated. The CFDA number, because I know that's going to come up down the road. So the CFDA number for this particular grant is 10.555, which is the exact same CFDA number as the National School Lunch Program. So USDA did not give the Supply Chain Assistance Fund a separate CFDA number. It is the same as the National School Lunch Program. Okay. Memo SFS 22-54, which is posted on our website. This includes an overview of those funds. Like I mentioned, it's the $16 million that was awarded to Louisiana. In this one memo, we have also included a link to SFS 22-53, which is the initial memo from USDA about the supply chain funds. And then we also have SFS 22-54, which is a list of all of the questions, which most of them I have already discussed today, so that you'll have heard them from us, as well as you'll have them in writing on this, this questions and answers document. The allocation memo will be coming very soon. So we are hoping that we'll have that allocation memo available hopefully by the end of this week. It is written, so the allocation memo is completely written and it is ready for us to post. We're just waiting to verify the amounts on the allocations before we make that posting. That memo will include the allocation, so each SFA will be listed and the allocated amount that they will receive next to their name. You can then look at that, see how much money you are intended to receive, and then make a decision whether or not you would like to receive those funds or decline those funds. And then you'll submit back to us as soon as you finish, making that decision. Submit that back to us by email or fax, and then we can then begin to allocate the funds out. In addition to the coming out through a memo, I'm also going to send out an email. So as soon as that memo is posted, I'll take that same information and put it in an email form and send it out to all of the authorized representatives. That'll come directly from me. So look for that as well. And that's just another way that we can ensure that you didn't overlook it through the memo. Okay, I'm now going to open it up to questions. I know that I have a few in here, so I'm going to go on mute for a minute and read through those, and then I'll answer those. Okay, there's a question about the documentation needed for the use of these funds. So that is in here as well. And I think that question may have come before I actually got to that part. So invoices, receipts, other documents that are provided when you purchase those funds. So you'll want to keep those. So mainly your invoices is what you'll be holding on to. There's a question about when these funds need to be completely spent. So, I think there's that is kind of up in the air. So hopefully we'll have these funds to you in March. I don't think that you'll probably be able to spend those funds fairly quickly. What I encourage you to do is, since this funding source does require such a very specific tracking mechanism, to try to spend those funds as quickly as possible, so you don't have to try to track this over multiple years. Even our biggest SFAs are still going to receive, a fair amount of money, but I think it's still going to be fairly small compared to the amount of money you spend on a regular basis. So ideally, if those could be spent during this this program year, that is ideal. But as you saw kind of with the second allocations, we may not be finished allocating funds until the beginning of next school year. So these funds have to be spent sometime within the grant period, not necessarily have to be this program year, but I do encourage you, for tracking purposes, it makes sense to try to spend it as quickly as possible, so you're not trying to track this over multiple years. There's a question about how this will be coded so that you'll be able to identify. At this point, I do not have exactly what the line item will be coming from LaGov, but as soon as I get that, I will let you know. So we are, as soon as we get a little bit closer to issuing payments, once they usually submit those payments to, once we submit those payments to appropriation control and they do their checks, that's usually the point in which they give us the memo of what will be included in that payment so you can track it. So as soon as I'm able to get that, we'll also put that out. Are there any other questions? No, this is really exciting. I know we keep giving a lot of different sources of money. So you know, I do know that kind of the limitations of this funding being that it is for minimally processed domestic food products, that it may be a little bit difficult, but I'm hoping that you can find some of what you already buy that you're planning on buying over the next few months and be able to use these funds specifically for that. So whether it be, you know, milk or some of your produce, you just want to make sure that if you are purchasing produce, that it is still a domestic product. So just being able to be real specific that these funds are going to be specifically for those minimally processed domestic food products. There's a question about whether or not this money can be used on supplies and not just food, and the answer is no. These monies are only to be spent on unprocessed or minimally processed domestic food products, so no labor, no supplies, all of that is not allowable, so it's only for unprocessed or minimally processed domestic food products. This training will be posted on Louisiana Fit Kids, so you can go back and listen to it. We'll also have the slides available. We do try to record all of our trainings. There are a few that personally I have forgot to resume recording, so I know they're not made available, but we do try to make them all available so you can go back and listen to them again. I also will touch on this again on Tuesday in our monthly call at 1 o'clock. But it will not be nearly as in-depth as this training. But when the funds do start to be allocated out, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. So we'll have this training linked in the memo as well. If there are any other questions, please put those in the chat box so I can try to answer those for you. And then you'll just hopefully be waiting for this. It's kind of like Christmas. You just wait for this to come, you know, like when you wait for Santa Claus to come. I feel like it's like my kids, we count down. Maybe we need to do like a vacation chain. And that's what I do at home when getting excited for a vacation. We cut down, cut a chain off each day until we get down to the day that these, you know, the excitement comes. So maybe we can do that for this as well. So hopefully it'll be really, really soon. Like I said, I hope that memo will be posted at the end of this week, the beginning of next week, and that we'll be able to get those funds out by the mid part of February or toward the end of February. Okay, there are no more questions. If you do come up with a question, feel free to email or call. Our email address is the Child Nutrition Programs at la.gov, or you can call us at 342-9661. Also, that same email address is where you'll submit the attestation form for these funds. Thank you all for joining today, and we look forward to you joining us again on Tuesday for the monthly call. If you need anything in the meantime, feel free to reach out.